Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Herz's words were like a lighted match being thrown into gasoline. With a roar, everyone in the banquet hall was ignited. The once quiet banquet hall had suddenly become bustling with noise. Everyone seemed to be discussing fervently, whispers were blending together, causing the quiet banquet hall to be lively like a city. All 24 young mages had a pleasantly surprised look. Before participating in the trials at Alana, none of them could have thought that such an opportunity was awaiting them. Prior to today, they had not even dreamed of being a guild president of a guild of magic. The Felon Kingdom was a country of magic. A president of a guild of magic was not a small matter. He could have enormous resources and the right to study the most complex spells, and he would not be bound by common law. Most in the crowd were not older than 20 years. At this age, immense power and an honorable status were undoubtedly the most tempting. Being able to become the president of a guild of magic at the age of 20 was something unheard of in the Felon Kingdom. The victor of this trial would be destined to be the brightest shining star of the Felon Kingdom. Who would be able to resist such an opportunity and temptation? Even the fidgeting Frederick that seemed like he has piles had his eyes lit. Both his eyes were staring at Herza. It was as though he was a wolf that had not eaten for days looking at a piece of fresh meat. Sarsen looked at Gryffindor, who was far away. This #1 genius of Felon was always composed. He would sometimes show a relaxed smile when speaking to his companions. However, he emitted an endless sense of self-confidence from his body. It was as though the championship of this finals was within his grasp. Sarsen let out a sigh. Although Gryffindor was arrogant, he had to admit that there was a reason for Gryffindor's self-confidence. Ever since they returned from the Shadow Glen, Sarsen met Gryffindor numerous times. He could clearly feel that Gryffindor's strength had immensely improved. The current him might already have bordered the realm of an archmage. Maybe just by progressing a little more, he would be able to step in the realm that every mage dreamed of. Even Sarsen could not make out how strong the current Gryffindor was. He only knew that he had been left in the dust by this #1 genius of Felon. The scenery of the Shadow Glen started to slowly appear in Sarsen. He had to admit that this world indeed had geniuses. Their existence was to let those who were trying to chase up to lose hope. For example, Gryffindor, who was approaching the realm of an archmage in his 20s, and that fella who went up against a lich. Most likely only that fella could be a match for Gryffindor. Sarsen unknowingly gazed into the distance. That young mage from Gerosis was still calm and composed. He was now bored, playing with a knife and fork. It looked like he was an outsider that was not affected by the earlier news at all. Compared to the cheering of the youngsters, the people like Macklin were more prudent. In fact, the looks on their faces could be described as serious. The over 20 archmages present were core members of the Alana Guild of Magic. The things they knew were much more profound than these youngsters. Their perspective of issues was naturally much more different. In fact, Macklin was now having a headache. A new Guild of Magic was not going to be that simple. This meant something of more immediate significance. For example, it could be the partition of the boundaries of authority, or the division of privileges or the relations between each other, and much more. These questions were Philistine, but they still existed, constantly puzzling everyone. The benefits of Felon's 24 guilds of magic were intertwined with each other, and it was very messy. This mess had not been cleared for more than 1,200 years since the end of the Dark Ages. Yet, the decision made by the Supreme Council was like taking this mess into their hands and squashing it. The mess that could not be solved was now worse. Nobody knew what the Supreme Council was thinking, much less what they were planning to do. Macklin did not know where this new Guild of Magic was going to be established. Felon Kingdom's most prosperous 24 cities had long ago set up their own Guild of Magic. Where was this new Guild of Magic that had suddenly appeared going to be established? Could it be the Breezy Plains? Thinking of this possibility, Macklin's facial expression changed immediately. Isn't this too exciting? The more Macklin thought about it, the more possible it became. After expanding his thoughts, the questions that he could not solve previously suddenly had an answer. No wonder the Supreme Council organized this trial. No wonder they intentionally added the mission in Shadowglen halfway through. No wonder the rules for the finals were so weird. Macklin's face had a look of understanding, but at the same time, he looked worried. Looking at Aldwin, who was beside him having the same expression, it seemed like both of them had the same idea. Macklin was restless. He decided to ask Herza. Luckily, Herza was the one that came this time. Herza was in charge of external affairs, and would come to Alana a few times a year. Macklin had a somewhat friendly relationship with him. Hence, Macklin moved closer shamelessly. Mage Herza, is it the breezy plains? The weather today is not bad. Macklin was choked by him until his eyes rolled. In his rage, he silently scolded, "Jerk." Macklin was right, Herza was befitting of the word jerk. A pleasant banquet had now been ruined by Herza. Under the bombardment of this news that was like an earthquake, who would be able to eat? The sumptuous dinner that was served tasted like sawdust for everyone. Being absent-minded, the meal had become bland. It was not long after 8 o'clock when everyone had dispersed. Ever since this hasty banquet, the atmosphere within Alana's Guild of Magic started to become very tense. The 24 young mages were desperately trying to improve. Those that had the right to enter the Omniscient Tower wanted to live inside it. Before dawn even broke, they went in, and only left the tower punctually at 9 o'clock at night. They were so focused that they did not want to waste a single second. They even felt like pouring their meals into their stomach when it was time to eat. As for the rest that could not enter the Omniscient Tower, they did not show weakness. They went to the Adventurers Guild without prior consultation and took on the most challenging missions. They used this self-torturing method to close the gap between them and the others. Even though they had a mountain like Gryffindor pressuring them, nobody gave up during this month. During a real battle, who would know what could happen? It was not only Gryffindor that had a chance to fight for this position. Maybe a mistake in a spell could deliver this chance to them. This was the general thought that most of these young mages had. This tense atmosphere was motivating many people. Even Mason, who was usually not very diligent, had visited the Omniscient Tower almost every day. Furthermore, he would drag Orin to the spell-testing hall, bombarding it with various spells. As for why he looked for Orin and not Lin Li, this was slightly complicated. If Mason were to answer, he would most likely whisper, F***ck. Do I not have nothing better to do but look for that monster? That's torture all right. Of course, even if he did want to find Lin Li, he might not be able to find him. Lin Li was as busy, it was just that the things he was busy with were different from the rest. Initially, he gave Elijah 1 month to find somebody in the black market. However, after 1 week, the blonde youngster had brought him good news. "Mr. Mage, I have already completed the task you gave me." The fair-skinned face of the blonde youth was filled with excitement. He had no choice but to be excited as it was a deal for 3 bottles for Bull's strength potion. "Bring me immediately." Lily did not say anything else and dragged Elijah out of the Guild of Magic. Both of them hurriedly left the guild hall and went through the streets of Alana. After a short time, they saw the main entrance of the Adventurers Guild. The black market was established within the vicinity of the Adventurers Guild, just like in Gerosis. This was very normal as it was natural to do such trades where adventurers were entering and leaving. Gerosis was a small northern city, and Alana was the imperial capital of Felon. These two cities had a vastly different style, but they had one thing in common, and it was how messy the black markets were. They were similarly bustling. Furthermore, the situation in Alana was worse than in Gerosis. This place was too awful. The pungent smell of low-quality tobacco mixed with sweat was very suffocating, and there was rubbish all over the floor. The fruit peels, scraps of paper, and ash were all mixed together. One had to be careful, for they might step on it. There were only noise and arguments when walking amongst the crowd. It was like a million flies, constantly buzzing beside your ear. Occasionally, there would be a scream. It was either a female adventurer that got groped, or a male adventurer that had their wallet stolen. All in all, this place was like a market, but magnified by 100 times. With a situation that was worse than Gerosis, it would naturally have more goods than Gerosis. After all, Alana was the capital of Felon. The adventurers here were much stronger than those in Gerosis. The products they could supply were naturally not something Gerosis's black market could compete with. From armor to weapons and magical crystals, from gems to ores and herbs. A dazzling array of products was piled together, causing people to see things in a blur. At the corner of the street, there were a few small metal cages, and within these cages were some thunder eaglets. Thunder eagles were level 10 magical beasts. Hunting their young was not easier than slaying the eagles. No matter if it was a human or a magical beast, they would erupt with astonishing power when their family was under threat. The one selling the thunder eaglets was a bandit wearing a brown leather armor. He looked to be in his 20s, and his pair of eyes had a unique feature. They seemed to be keen. No matter who looked over, it seemed like their first reaction would be to cover their wallets. Jirian, that shameless person, said before that an attractive guild president like himself did not have to do anything, he only needed to show an adequate expression, and people would obey him. Lin Li felt that this description was befitting of this fella. Such an attractive bandit like him did not have to do anything, people would cover their wallets if he just made a face at them. Without a doubt, he was indeed an attractive bandit. What was more attractive than his eyes was his figure. This figure was indeed too spectacular. Based on Lin Li's estimation, this bandit that was wearing leather armor with 2 daggers by his boots was fatter than Jirian. He seemed like a meatball when looking at him. It was hard for Lin Li to imagine, how was this huge thing able to achieve high-difficulty movements such as stealthy movements and sneak attacks. Mr. Mage, you have sharp eyes. With one look, you seem to have taken a fancy to my thunder eagles. Come over and take a look. I am selling genuine thunder eaglets, one for 10,000 gold coins. I would even give you an exclusive secret rearing manual for free. Don't miss it as you walk past. It is a rare deal to rear a thunder eagle for such a cheap price. The fat bandit's exaggerated promotion made Lin Li feel amused. This guy was indeed made for business. He promoted the thunder eagles to a mage. These level 10 magical beasts were naturally proficient in thunder spells, but they had no specialty in fighting. There was no need for a mage to buy it. Was it not equivalent to bringing more thunderbolt scrolls? Shut up, Sean. Elijah operated a mercenary corp. He would make deals with all sorts of people in the black market almost every day. The tricks of this fat bandit were not known to others, but Elijah definitely knew them. What exclusive secret rearing manual? This jerk's secret magical beast rearing manual was copied from a circus in the first place. A thunder eagle was a level 10 magical beast. It would not be possible to be good at rearing when using these methods for cats and dogs. If such methods were possible, wouldn't Amril be full of magical beast tamers? It was not that nobody bought magical beasts offspring from him before. It was just that out of those who bought it, who had successfully reared them? Magical beasts were not the usual beasts. When they matured, the natural ferocity and bloodlust would start to show, but it would not be seen when they were young. Once it had reached that point, any training would be useless. It was either to kill or be killed by it. Luckily, those that had bought these magical from this fella chose to do the former. For the time being, no human blood had been shed. Otherwise, this guy would have been beaten to death. This originally had nothing to do with Elijah, for everybody was making a living. He sold his fake rearing methods, while Elijah managed his own mercenary corp. It was fine once you knew, and would not be scammed. There was no need to ruin his business. But, the problem was this guy chose to scam this monstrous mage out of everybody else. Was he somebody that you could just casually scam as well? If you want to die by yourself, it is fine. But if he felt that I brought him to get scammed, wouldn't I be in deep trouble? For the fat bandit's safety, and much more so for his own, Elijah had no choice but to step in. He righteously stood out and exposed this person. Ah, if it isn't Captain Elijah. Just a joke, just a joke. I merely saw the pleasant weather today, and I just cracked a joke with this mage. Once he saw that Elijah appear, the fatty started to tremble in fear. F***ck, it was not easy to spot a gullible target, and it was this person's friend. Seems like this deal is busted. Elijah was not to be messed with. He was somebody that traded infrequently in the black market. There was no way to hide this little trick away from his eyes. Mr. Fellick, you can ignore him. This fella is a cheat. He doesn't have any exclusive secret manual. After Elijah had taught a lesson to the fat bandit, he carefully explained to Lin Li in fear that Lin Li would misunderstand that he had anything to do with the bandit. It's nothing, Lin Li smiled, he did not take it to heart. From the start, he never believed there was an exclusive secret manual. Why would anyone with this secret manual fall so low as to depend on selling magical beast offspring for a living? Furthermore, it was so cheap. A thunder eaglet for 1,000 gold each? This was a level 10 magical beast. If it was possible to rear it, it could be sold randomly for tens of thousands of gold coins, and not just 1,000 gold. It was not a small matter to rear a level 10 magical beast. Even Lin Li, a former super hunter, was only able to master the art of rearing a level 5 magical beast. The real question for Lin Li was, where did this guy get these thunder eaglets from? Thunder eagles were indeed level 10 magical beasts, naturally proficient at thunder spells. Not everybody could withstand a thunderbolt. From the looks of it, this bandit was not higher than level 10. It would already be very exhausting to face a thunder eagle alone. Furthermore, he had to steal their offspring from their nest. A single thunder eagle nest would require a team of 10 people. If he went alone, wouldn't it be the same as courting death? Just as Lin Li seemed uncertain, that round bandit was looking puzzled. He did not understand some things. He knew the status of Elijah, captain of the Silver Moon Ranger Mercenary Corporation. He was only in his 20s, and had single-handedly raised a mercenary corps to a scale of more than 100 people. He could be considered one of the top figures even amongst Alana's adventurers. No matter how he looked, he couldn't understand it. Why was Elijah so respectful towards this young mage? This was uncharacteristic of Elijah. Could it be the background of this young mage was so good that Elijah had no choice but to be respectful? The fat bandit could not make head nor tail out of it. He only heard that Lin Li left him a message before leaving. Help me reserve 1 thunder eagle. Ah? The fat bandit was stunned for a while. When Elijah had appeared just now, he already knew this deal was busted. A person like Elijah was definitely able to see through his small trickery. Since that young mage was Elijah's friend, naturally he would not be going to be baited. But when that young mage left, what did that sentence mean? Help him reserve 1 thunder eagle? There were still people who were earning a lot. Oh, yes. What is the background of that bandit? Lin Li casually asked while walking. That guy is called Sean, a famous cheater in this area. He is a level 10 bandit. I heard he was from Breezy City, but for unknown reasons, he came to Alana. Usually, he does not accept missions from the Adventurers Guild, he only relies on selling magical beasts' offspring to make ends meet. I also do not know where he gets these magical beasts' offspring from. Are there a lot? Yes. Almost after each period of time, he would change the offspring he is selling. The other time, I think I saw him selling Shadow Panther offspring. That fella is really screwing around. Luckily, they were sold. Otherwise, when these Shadow Panther cubs have grown up, who knows what may happen. This fella was really talented, he could even obtain the cubs of a Shadow Panther. Lin Li was interested in this fat bandit, but there was not much time. He had to wait till he finished settling the fire salamandered leather business, before coming back to have a chat with him. Elijah and Lin Li walked through the foul-smelling street amidst the arguments. They squeezed through with difficulty until half an hour later, when Elijah finally stopped. Mr. Fellick, it's here. What he pointed at was a torn and tattered workshop. This workshop was befitting of being described as torn and tattered. From afar, it was just a piece of wood dangling. It seemed like a gust of wind would blow away the main door, while the furnace outside the door was not even lit. The anvil had a thick layer of dust on top. When Lin Li walked over, the site was bare and empty. It was as if it had been a while since the furnace had been lit. The fire salamandered leather were purchased from here. Elijah stood outside the workshop and introduced it to Lin Li softly. This boss has a weird temperament, he may not open his store for days. Today, I saw that he had opened his store when I came early in the morning, so I rushed to the Guild of Magic to look for you. Luckily, we made it. Lin Li looked at the insides of the furnace, and then he looked at the anvil before asking curiously, "Oh, yes. Mr. Elijah. How much did you spend to purchase those items?" "Just calling me Elijah will do." Lin Li addressing him as Mr. caused Elijah to be overwhelmed by flattery and honor. He was in a daze for a while, before he remembered about the deal. Those items were traded for with a batch of ores. Oh, Lin Li nodded, and did not ask what ores. The shop was terrifyingly silent. When both of them walked in, Lin Li thought that he had entered a haunted house. There was nothing inside except for a thin old man, lying in a chair with his eyes closed. It seemed like he was taking a break, but it also felt like he was taking a nap. His hand held a lighted pipe that was flickering. In the midst of the sound of clicks, he suddenly erupted into coughing. It sounded like a workshop's bellows with a raspy sound. This made Lin Li sympathize with him. "I will not do any deals today. If there is anything, we'll talk tomorrow." Only when the both of them walked into the store did the old man open his muddy eyes. "Master Hoyer, don't you remember me?" Elijah carefully asked. The old blacksmith glanced and seemingly remembered. "Oh, it's you. Master Hoyer, my visit today is to ask you about." Elijah had a smile on his face, but before he could finish speaking, the old man had rudely interrupted. "Did you bring any ores again when you came over today?" That I didn't." Elijah was stunned slightly. Before he could speak, the old man waved his hands. "Then you can scram." Lin Li was astonished. He had seen many bad attitudes before. This included himself, as he was a person with a rather bad attitude. However, this old man's bad attitude was a first for him. The old blacksmith's words were not any different from a slap. Even a tactful person like Elijah was frozen right there. At that moment, leaving or staying were both not right. His fair-toned face was filled with awkwardness. "Master Hoyer, may I say a few words?" Lin Li shot a look over to Elijah to tell him to take a seat, he'd settle the rest of it. "You are?" The old blacksmith was smoking his cigar, he did not even raise his eyelids. "My name is Felix, and I am from Jerosis." "What has that got to do with me? I am just asking you if you brought ores." Lin Li rolled his eyes. This old man was rather persistent about the ores, but after taking into account the source of fire salamandered leather, he controlled his temper, and answered, "Ores are not an issue. If you can promise to answer my questions, I will try to source out whatever ores you want." Such big words, the old blacksmith coldly laughed. "How about eternal adamantine ores? I have a batch of refined ones with me right now." "You're saying you have a batch eternal adamantine?" This was the first time the old blacksmith looked surprised ever since Lin Li walked into the workshop. "I coincidentally have one batch." Judging by the look on the old man's face, Lin Li knew that there was a good chance this time. He immediately smiled, and continued tempting him. "If you don't like those, I can provide others. For example, abyss mithril and abyss fiendish iron. I got a couple of those ice crystal metal and infernal copper or something on hand right now." "These ores, you have them all?" The old blacksmith could not sit still once he heard of the myriad of ores. He immediately changed from lying to sitting down. He stopped smoking and just left it in his mouth, despite the choking smoke spreading. That face, which was full of wrinkles, was now astonished. The way he looked at Lin Li was no longer disdainful. "I should have them." Lin Li thought for a bit, and he was a little unsure. "There are too many ores. I don't have the time to check them one by one as well." "What do you want to know?" "I just want to find out Where did you hunt for fire salamandered leather that you gave to Elijah the previous time? Fire salamandered leather? The old man glanced at Lin Li, but he did not answer the question. He just took another 2 puffs of his cigar, before turning to Elijah and asking, I gave you something like that before? That leather armor, Elijah cautiously reminded him. Oh, you're talking about that leather armor? That's right. Kid, that was just a piece of leather armor. What made you so sure that I would be able to tell you the location to hunt for fire salamandrids? The old man leaned back in his chair. His emotions could not be felt from his voice. You're joking, Lin Li smiled. He pulled over a chair to sit down without waiting for the old man telling him to do so. Then, he began to tell the old man, look, I am a mage. Mages are able to determine the actual attributes of equipment through a special method. Allow me the liberty to say this, those 2 pieces of equipment had identical attributes. In other words, they came from the same person. What has that got to do with me? It could be that someone sold it to me. You're joking again, Lin Li was still smiling. He shifted his chair and moved closer to the old blacksmith. I am not too sure about that fire salamandered leather armor. However, I am sure I did not misjudge that double-edged sword. It is definitely from this workshop. Kid, did you see clearly? That is a magical weapon. I am blacksmith that is waiting to die. If I had that ability, I would have been hired by a large workshop like magical weapon. Why would I stay in this forsaken place? Naturally, I have my reasons for being so sure. Don't be hasty, listen to me slowly. After Lin Li said that, he pointed at the furnace outside. If I remember correctly, the top of the double-edged sword should have some abyss fiendish iron melted into it, right? When I walked in just now, I had already looked inside the furnace. It was such a coincidence that the inside of the furnace had a trace of crimson imprints. Don't tell me that you don't know that when abyss fiendish iron has melted, it would quickly permeate any metal it comes in contact with? Just a little touch would leave a permanent imprint. The old man puffed his cigar. After some time, he suddenly asked, You're really a mage? I guess so, Lin Li thought for a bit. He was really slightly unsure. A mage that knows forging isn't common. The old man carefully placed his pipe down. He stood up as though he has made a decision. His muddy eyes stared at Lin Li and extended 2 fingers. Number 1, forge magical equipment with 2 attributes for me now. I don't believe that you are a mage that knows how to forge. Number 2, give me a batch of eternal adamantine. I will not take it for free, I will trade it with you. You can put forward anything in this workshop of mine that you take a fancy to. Once these 2 tasks have been completed, I will tell you where to hunt those fire salamandrids. No problem. Lin Li did not say anything else, and rolled up the sleeves of his robe. He lit a fire in the furnace by himself, not allowing the blacksmith to help him. For Lin Li, magical equipment with 2 magical attributes did not pose any difficulty. Just by the designs in his head, he could come up with dozens of them. The Frostfire sword that he'd forged in the Guild of Magic the other day was a typical example of magical equipment that had 2 attributes. It was just that Lin Li did not plan on doing the same thing again. Just when the fire had started, Lin Li suddenly discovered that the temperature of the furnace was higher than normal furnaces. Furthermore, the flame inside was purer than normal. Just this discovery alone increased Lin Li's appraisal of that old blacksmith. Only blacksmiths like them that reached this level would know that during forging, factors other than craftsmanship were just as vital. The purer the flame, the lower chance of producing impurities and making mistakes. After starting a fire in the furnace, Lin Li casually took out an iron embryo from a pile of metals. The old blacksmith leaned against a recliner with his eyes closed as he sucked on the pipe intensely. The thick smoke that filled the blacksmith's shop did not affect him at all. If he was only a little curious at the beginning, then he would be a little surprised now. He had been a blacksmith for decades. How would he not know the difficulty in forging a dual-attributed magical weapon? Just the selection process for the materials alone would be long and arduous. The 2 different attributes were fated to clash with each other. Therefore, a special magical metal, such as the valuable rainbow adamantine, would be required to forge a multi-attributed magical equipment. Although this man is a young mage, he is familiar with the characteristics of abyss fiendish iron. Not only that, he also knows the special qualities of my furnace. Hence, he might have some knowledge in forging. But why would one use an iron embryo as material in forging? Can't he tell that that is only a normal iron embryo that cannot withstand the clashes between the different attributes? The old blacksmith could only think of two possibilities. The first was that Lin Li was trying to act smart. After hearing about the characteristics of the abyss fiendish iron, Lin Li went to him to act like he knew everything. That reason, however, was less likely. Normal human beings would not be so natural and composed when lying. The second reason would be that Lin Li had extreme confidence in using a normal piece of iron embryo to create a magical weapon that would have two attributes. Frankly speaking, Hoyer was still skeptical. He had lived in Alana as a blacksmith for decades, and was thus fully aware that there would only be 3 to 5 people who were able to use ordinary iron embryos while forging dual-attributed weapons in the whole of Alana. Lin Li's occupation as a mage, and his young age, however, did not seem like a person from the master level. Dong, dong, dong. A rapid and clear noise sounded out as the red iron embryo transformed quickly under the hammer. Lin Li used a different technique when he was knocking on the metal. Although he was very gentle, the frequency of the knocking was extremely high, like never-ending raindrops. Under that crisp and rhythmic knocking, the red iron embryo turned into a thin sheet in a short amount of time. After cooling the metal by folding it around for a couple of times, Lin Li placed it back in the furnace again. While he winded the bellow with one hand, he wiped the sweat on his forehead with another. 800 folds forging technique. The old blacksmith gasped through the pipe that he left in his mouth. His cloudy eyes immediately became sparkly as he stared at Lin Li with amazement. How is that possible? The old blacksmith was dumbfounded at what he saw. This thin and weak-looking young mage is indeed a blacksmith, and a proficient one. And he used the 100 folds forging technique. Hoyer had been a blacksmith for decades. How could he not know about the 100 folds forging technique? It would be no exaggeration to say that the mastery of this method would make one a guru of the smithing industry. The 100 folds forging technique required countless knocks onto the iron embryo to turn it into a thin metal sheet. Then, it would need to be folded repetitively. Although the weapon created with such a technique would appear thin and flat, within, it would be like a 1,000-layered cake. With that, not only would the edge of the blade be sharp, it would also be malleable and tough. This technique was especially vital for weapons like single-handed swords, machetes, and daggers. They would be powerful, and not be destroyed during battles. Seeing that, the old blacksmith knew that he had met a guru. For such a weapon, its craftsmanship would be enough to turn it into a top-quality equipment, not forgetting its magical properties. It had been ages since the old blacksmith had last seen the real 100 folds forging technique. Elijah was completely stupefied too. He was not a professional like the old smith, and he had never heard of the 100 folds forging technique. To be frank, he was absolutely unskilled in forging. Yet even this amateur could tell that Lin Li was definitely a forging expert just from looking at his swift and precise movements. With such craftsmanship, anyone could tell that it was not Lin Li's first attempt at holding a hammer. If someone were to tell Elijah that the young mage outside was actually an old and experienced blacksmith, Elijah would accept the saying without questioning it. And that was the reason for him to be utterly surprised. How could Elijah not know who was that man outside their shop? He was a genuine mage, a mage that could kill a level 18 shapeshifter in the blink of an eye, just like a skeletal warrior with flesh. At this moment, another person entered the blacksmith shop. He was a burly middle-aged man around 40, and had a squarish face, with a majestic beard, and short and bold blonde hair. His mere presence radiated a strong sense of righteousness. It had to be the appearance. However, this decent man looked a little disconcerted. Lin Li could find 5 bruises on his bronze complexion that seemed to be left behind by a woman's slap due to its slenderness. "Hoyer, help me." Upon entering the blacksmith shop, the man looked around frantically with no sense of composure a gentleman should have. "You bastard," the old blacksmith chided him in exasperation. Then, he sighed and pointed behind him. "Scram to the back." "Okay." The honest man entered the blacksmith shop and walked towards where the old blacksmith pointed to immediately as if it were his own house. Crack. After pushing on one of the bricks, a secret passageway appeared. "Thanks, old Hoyer," the middle-aged man said as he lowered himself and sneaked into it. "Scram," the old man replied in anger, the pipe in his hands almost dropped. Right after the honest man left, a hot and sexy female adventurer stopped by the blacksmith shop. One of her arms rested on her hips as she pointed at the old blacksmith with another. "Old Hoyer, did that darn hooligan come here to hide?" Lin Li did not know what grievances the female adventurer suffered for her face to turn so red in fury. Amidst the big breaths she drew, the mountains on her chest rose and fell. Only after the old blacksmith puffed out a mouth of smoke from his pipe did he open his eyes groggily to ask, "What hooligan are you referring to? I didn't see any. Is he really not here?" The tone of the female adventurer became less harsh. Since the blacksmith shop was not huge and had a simple interior, any human would know there would be no place for any man to hide. After all, the shop only had a pile of metals, the old blacksmith's recliner, and a desk near the entrance. "If you want to, you can come in and search." Perhaps due to the wariness toward old Hoyer, although the female adventurer did not really believe his words, she did not enter the shop. After standing at the entrance in rage and looking into the shop suspiciously for a while, she left unwillingly. She was still in rage when she left, and the mountains on her chest moved as usual. The old blacksmith sighed as he shouted into the secret passageway, "You can come out now." "Thanks, old Hoyer, I will treat you to a meal next time," the honest man replied, and came out of hiding after hearing that the coast was clear. He had a dignified expression and solemn aura, none of the unsettledness like before. "What did you do this time?" "I noticed that her boobs were exceptionally huge and wanted to see if they were fake. Who knew I exerted too much force when I pinched them? Damn, she not only gave me a tight slap, but also chased me here. Need to be more careful next time," the middle-aged man responded with much righteousness. What an honest man. He was filled with righteousness even when talking about touching women's breasts. Despite being able to concentrate on his hammering previously, Lin Li could not help but lose the focus that he nearly hit his breasts, hands. At that moment, it was as though Lin Li could see the black vertical lines born of speechlessness on the old blacksmith's forehead. After replying, the middle-aged man saw Lin Li outside. Under Lin Li's rapid and rhythmic hammering, the iron embryo turned into a thin sheet of metal on the working desk once more. "Old Hoyer, who's that child?" the middle-aged man inquired casually, but his words stopped when he saw what Lin Li was doing. He exclaimed, "Hundredfold's forging technique." "You're right," the old blacksmith's gaze was still fixed on the hammer in Lin Li's hand. "Your disciple?" "I don't have that honor." "Then what is he doing?" "That interesting fella made a bet with me. He said he could create a dual-attributed magical weapon." "Dual-attributed?" The middle-aged man glimpsed the anvil and gasped. "With a normal piece of iron embryo?" "That's right. That fella is indeed interesting." When the two men talked, Lin Li had already created 20 layers within the metal, and was molding the metal into a dagger now. Actually, if he was willing to, he could increase the total number of layers to 100. However, it was meaningless to do so as 20 layers were enough for the dagger to tolerate the dual attribute force. Furthermore, why should he tire himself in something he was not going to be paid for? While the dagger was still red, Lin Li reached into his pocket for a bottle of navy sand. While hammering the dagger with one hand, he lifted the cork stopper of the bottle with his teeth. Then, Lin Li gently poured a layer of navy sand over the red dagger. The navy sand melted the instant it came into contact with heat, emitting a faint magical wave that filled the blacksmith shop. After all these, Lin Li could finally take a breather. Then, he took his staff and pointed it at the bucket of water beside the furnace. What followed the rapid recitation was vapor that rose from the water bucket. The cold water within it turned into floating ice instantaneously. Subsequently, Lin Li picked up the dagger with metal pincers and dropped it into the bucket, gently. Szzz. Mist filled the blacksmith shop. The old blacksmith was stunned upon seeing the mist. How did it get quenched by that single layer of navy sand? The confused blacksmith muttered as he stared at Lin Li skeptically. Does he intend to coat the dagger with just a layer of martensite? That's weird, mumbled the middle-aged man beside him suspiciously. While the two men were occupied with their doubts, Lin Li had finished the last act of quenching. When he picked up the dagger that had been cooled with the pincers again, he did not rush to pass it to the old blacksmith. Instead, he reached into his pocket once more, and took out a crystal pen. After dipping it into the navy sand, he drew a few strokes on the dagger. Here's the dual-attributed magical weapon you wanted. Dual-attributed? The old blacksmith asked in a daze. The middle-aged man beside them asked in astonishment, the ward of bad luck? Yes. Lin Li nodded his head calmly, but his yes was like a clap of thunder that boomed from the top of the head of the middle-aged man. He stared at Lin Li in shock as if he had just met a ghost. You could use the 100-folds forging technique to build the structure of the ward of bad luck? The voice of the middle-aged man trembled. The honest man gasped, while the old blacksmith snatched the dagger. His movement was quick and stealthy, without a hint of senility. Compared to his listless expression before, it was as though he was another person. When he held the dagger, the old blacksmith understood everything at once. It was neither sharpened nor polished, and had an extremely rough surface. Yet, the sky-blue veins on it were utterly clear and defined. Since the old man was one of the top blacksmiths in Alana, he realized the reason just with one look at the markings. Genius, he's a true genius. Other than that word, old Hoyer could not think of anything else to describe Lin Li. It was those veins on the dagger that made it so precious. Coating a weapon with navy sand after forging, it was a very natural action for it to have a martensitic property. However, it was the same navy sand that made the process a profound one. While giving the weapon a martensitic quality, the navy sand would also seep through the markings on it. Since the positions of these markings were carefully calculated to form the outline of the ward of bad luck, a few more strokes, and it would turn into an authentic one. The old blacksmith looked at the dagger in his hands, and then at the young mage. All of a sudden, it was as if he felt the high heat from that dagger. Master Hoyer, when do you wish to collect that batch of minerals from eternal adamantine? Lin Li asked with a smile as he brushed off the astonishment of the two men casually. To be honest, Lin Li played a small trick in the forging process. After all, that was a normal piece of iron embryo. Even if it underwent the 100-folds forging technique, it would still be an ordinary iron embryo. It was too troublesome to use it to create a dual-attributed magical weapon. Although Lin Li could do it, he wouldn't want to waste his energy on it. Hence, he made use of the markings left behind by the 100-folds forging technique by adding the navy sand that would permeate through it to construct a ward of bad luck. With one ward of bad luck, and one with martensitic properties, he fulfilled the requirements of creating a dual-attributed magical weapon. Eternal adamantine? Before the old blacksmith could reply, the middle-aged man interrupted. He glimpsed at the old man distastefully, and complained, "Old dude, you are too selfish. We have known each other for so many years. How could you not tell me that you have gotten a hold of the eternal adamantine? Do you have any conscience or morals?" "Shut up," the old blacksmith barked as he glared at him. Then, he pointed at Lin Li, and said, "I don't have any with me now. You can look for him instead since you have what he needs too." "What do I have?" "The skin of fire salamandrids. Didn't you give me a few sheets if it the last time?" "The skin of fire salamandrids?" The middle-aged man grinned, and stopped pestering the old man. He went up to Lin Li with a smile beaming with passion, and asked, "Young man, do you want to exchange eternal adamantine for fire salamandrid skins?" Lin Li was uncomfortable due to the middle-aged man's sudden friendliness. He went 2 steps backwards cautiously. After pulling a little distance away from him, he nodded his head in a daze and replied, "Yes, I do." that's great. The middle-aged man reached a hand out to Lin Li, and introduced himself politely. Hey young man, I'm Azalez. Nice to meet you. Azalez? The moment the middle-aged man ended his speech, Elijah nearly jumped. With an expression filled with fright, and a pair of eyes opened as wide as a bull's, he stared at the middle-aged man blankly and stuttered, he's Azalez? Yeah, that's the pervert. Azalez's name was not only familiar to Elijah, even Lin Li had heard countless people mention him. He was a legend. In the recent 100 years, there were 2 legendary-level warriors from Alana. One was the level 21 sword sage of the storm, Al-Akir, the only one in charge of Alana's adventurers guild. The other man was Azalez. As a noble, he entered the army when he was just 16 years old. After serving Felon Kingdom passionately for 20-odd years, he attained numerous meritorious military achievements. At 40 years old, he took up the role as the leader of the Sky Knights. Sky Knights were one of the 3 imperial guards of Felon Kingdom, and had the best military might. As the leader of the troop, it meant that Azalez was the #1 force of the military in Felon Kingdom. Lin Li glanced at Azalez, and then at the old blacksmith. He got confused for quite a while. From their conversation with each other, Lin Li had already observed that the middle-aged man and the old blacksmith were no ordinary people. But, he didn't not accept that they were that extraordinary. The man who gave off an awe-inspiring and righteous vibe was not only a perverted fella, but also a legendary level 21 warrior, the leader of the Sky Knights, Azalez. A pervert as the leader of the Sky Knights. That old blacksmith, Hoyer, must be something too. This. Mr. Azalez, how should we do the exchange? If you are willing, Azalez continued after hesitating for a moment, I could give you all 10 sheets of fire salamandered skins. If that's not enough, I could go and find more for you. But you'd better give me 20 ingots of eternal adamantine. I need to create a set of armor, and it would be troublesome if I have a shortage of that. No problem, 10 is enough. Lin Li agreed upon the transaction swiftly after thinking about it. Frankly speaking, even a child could tell Azalez's extreme desperation for the eternal adamantine. Not only did he not mind giving up 10 sheets of skin, he was also prepared to help Lin Li find more of them. If Lin Li wanted to bargain with him, he could make use of this loophole to demand more, not only 10 sheets, but perhaps 20 or 30 of them too. Yet, Lin Li did not think there was a need to do so. From his perspective, fire salamandrids were not excellent material for armors. Without their strong resistance against fire element, they would not have much significance. The only reason for Lin Li to use it was because he needed to go Fire Plume Ridge to harvest ingredients for potions. Considering Sean's body size, 2 sets of armor could definitely be created from 10 sheets of fire salamandered skin. One should not waste effort on meaningless tasks. Let's go, let's go. I will pass it to you now, Azalez urged as he pulled Lin Li off impatiently once the deal had been set. Before Lin Li left, he reminded Elijah, oh, yes. Elijah, come to the Guild of Magic tomorrow. I will give you your rewards. Yes, Mr. Fellick. After Lin Li left the blacksmith shop, he visited the fat bandit. He wanted to buy a thunder eaglet for research. If not for Fat Bandit's reminder, he would have forgotten the need to tame magical beasts. When he was still at the Endless World, he battled in a high-difficulty mission as a hunter. Although he did not complete that mission, he remembered some techniques in taming. They were not any ordinary taming methods. If Lin Li were to follow the instructions religiously, he would be able to tame a level 10 magical beast. But, for his skills as a hunter then, the ability to tame was not important at all. Even if he could train a level 10 magical beast, it would not be able to survive the attack from the Stars of Fury. So, Lin Li did not pay much attention to that matter then. Yet as he transmigrated as a mage, these taming tips became extremely valuable. The body of a mage was too weak. Lin Li felt like he was walking on tightrope in almost every battle. Especially when he was at the Shadow Glen, Lin Li had the fear that any slight mistakes would doom him eternally. If he had a powerful pet, how would the low-level creatures like skeletal warriors of at most level 10 be any trouble to them? One pet would be enough to wipe all of the skeletal warriors out without the use of magic. They would only need to sit there and enjoy the show. Mages had pets too. They were known as familiars. It was a level 15 spell to summon a familiar from another dimension. Yet these types of familiars were usually not equipped with battle skills. Apart from high intelligence, they were no different from cats and dogs. Most of the times like this, mages would treat the familiars as their personal assistants. For example, Lin Li saw Jiren summon his familiar during his few months' stay in Gerosis. They were at the potion room that day, and the familiar was summoned to help the busy Jiren pick up a few test tubes. Were there any familiars that were to be used for battles? Yes, there were. But there were too few of them. In 10 mages, there might not be one with the ability to summon a familiar. Hence, Lin Li really valued the taming techniques a lot. Since he had been a super hunter, he knew how to instruct his pets to do chores very well. He knew better than anyone else the best time to order the pets to help them kill their enemies or create destruction. If he were to succeed in taming any level 10 magical beast, his capability in battling would be raised by a level. The knowledge of taming, however, was different from that of potions. Lin Li was uncertain if the knowledge would be effective in Amril. Thus, he decided to attempt it with a thunder eaglet, who knew that when Lin Li arrived, the fat man was nowhere to be found. Judging from the empty metal cage on the ground, it seemed that he did not even have the time to pack them when he left in a hurry. Standing at the corner of the street, Lin Li could not help but feel odd. He only took less than an hour from the time he'd entered the blacksmith shop and exited from it with Azalez. How did the fat bandit disappear in such a short amount of time? Little fella, you wanted to look for Sean? Azalez sounded as though he frequented the black market as well. From how Lin Li stood at the corner of the streets, he already guessed whom he wanted to look for. Yes, Mr. Azalez. Do you know him? Of course I do. That bastard sells the offspring of magical beasts here every day. I don't know how many have been deceived by him already. He's going to be caught and brought by the garrison of Alana to the dungeons one day. The middle-aged man chided the fat bandit righteously, forgetting that he was no different from him. From how he molested female adventurers every day, he might gain even more hatred from the people. But this fella got some skills. He could actually get a hold of so many magical beasts' offspring, the middle-aged man finally remarked objectively after criticizing the fat bandit. Actually, Lin Li nodded, and asked in suspicion, Mr. Azalez, does Sean always run off after agreeing on a transaction? Of course. The middle-aged man laughed gloatingly. What do you think he does? Hearing that, Lin Li understood everything. That fat bandit was a conman. Conning was a dangerous profession, one could get into trouble any time. Now that he did not even have time to keep his metal cage, it might mean that someone was after him. You need to find him? Yeah. There's no need to worry. He will be back after a few days when the coast is clear. Since it's not that great an issue, nothing would happen to him after the victim's anger subsides. All right, I will come back after a few days, then. After they walked out from the black market, the two chatted casually. Lin Li gradually realized that apart from being a little perverse and quite a pretentious prick, it was easy to get along with this leader of the Sky Knights. The conversation made the journey less boring too. And the conversation's topic was naturally related to forging. Throughout the journey, Azalez appeared to be very composed, but his anxiety grew as he spoke. As a natural pervert, he even forgot that he took advantage of a female adventurer. How unimaginable. In the world of Amril, every warrior was expected to have the skill set in forging, just like how most mages were proficient in the studies of inscription. Legendary level Azalez had great knowledge in forging no ordinary man would be able to comprehend. Although he was not like old Hoyer, or like the person from the Adventurer Guild, Azalez's forging skills could still be considered as one of the best in Alana. However, his skill was nothing comparable to the young mage's. That fellow looked no older than 20 years old, but when it came to forging, it was as if he had been an old blacksmith for decades. He could talk to Lin Li about anything. Although Lin Li was a man of few words, all his words would be able to address the crux of their topics. And then, Azalez could tell that that young mage knew more than what they talked about. The suggestions he gave seemed very casual, as though it did not require much thinking. That feeling reminded Azalez of his mentor when he was still a novice in a blacksmith shop. Now, his forging skills had already peaked in the whole of Alana. "Felek, my house is in front." The two men grew closer as they journeyed from the black market. Azalez had already switched from addressing Lin Li as little fella to the passionate Felek. In reality, if it was not for Lin Li's age, Azalez really hoped to learn from him, and let him coach him in the art of forging. With the advice from such an experienced person, he might have the chance to surpass old Hoyer and reach the level of the man from the Adventurer Guild. Unfortunately, as a legendary level man, and the leader of the Sky Knights, if he were to treat such a youngster as his master and learn from him, it would be a huge embarrassment for Azalez. He would not dare to lift his head any more next time, and would be covering his face with a piece of cloth. Only to think of something, Azalez muttered as he grew more and more impatient as they walked. The attainment of this young man in the art of forging were beyond his imagination. While they walked, Azalez had decided that even if he could not be Lin Li's apprentice, he had to ask for his advice on forging. Lin Li was not at all concerned what Azalez was thinking about. In reality, Azalez was right. Lin Li only replied out of boredom subconsciously. He merely spoke because someone was asking him questions. Just like how you met someone familiar during a stroll after dinner, if he asked you if you had had your dinner, you would also reply with a "just eaten," yet he knew not that Lin Li was a guru. His skills in forging had gone beyond what normal people could imagine. As a guru, any word that came out from Lin Li's mouth would be enough to create a great admiration from Azalez. Azalez's mansion was not far from the black market. One was indifferent, while the other wanted to chat a little while more. Hence, no one called for a carriage, and they traveled slowly on foot. Yet, they only took around half an hour. Azalez invited Lin Li to take a seat in the living room graciously before coming out with a parcel. "Come, Felek, here's the 10 pieces of salamandered skins you wanted." After giving Lin Li the parcel, he did not pester him for the eternal adamantine. Instead, he patted on chest fervently and assured him, "If these are not enough, you could come and look for me directly. I can't vouch for other matters, but giving you a few more salamandered skins would definitely not be a problem." "It's enough already." Lin Li received the parcel, and said apologetically, "But, Mr. Azalez, I'm afraid I can only give you the eternal adamantine tomorrow. You know, those things are so heavy. I can't carry them everywhere I go." Of course, he was lying. The eternal adamantine, which he'd just finished smelting a few days ago, was lying quietly in his ring of endless storm. And Lin Li did not intend to take them out in front of Azalez. Only Anduin and Shan knew of the existence of the ring of endless storm. They were the two men whom Lin Li trusted not to divulge that secret. Azalez was really a nice man. However, since it was the first time for Lin Li to meet Azalez, it would be too abrupt to show him such a high-level item. "No problem. You can give me the eternal adamantine whenever you are free." Despite giving Lin Li the fire salamandered skins, he could only receive the eternal adamantine another day. If it was before, Azalez would definitely not allow that. After all, the eternal adamantine was very important to him. Wouldn't it be problematic if that fella stood him up? However, it was different now. After realizing Lin Li's great potential and ability, he really hoped to consult him more in the art of forging. When Lin Li told him he would give him the things he needed the next day, Azalez was more than happy to agree on it. How would he reject that request? Initially, Lin Li had planned to rush back to the Guild of Magic the moment he acquired the salamandered skins. Yet, Azalez insisted that he stay behind to chat. Seeing that the sky wasn't that dark yet, Lin Li did not reject his offer further, and sat in the spacious living room for idle chit-chat. But, this time, the topic of the conversation was not like before, regarding the field of forging. While they were conversing, Azalez asked casually, Oh, yes. Felix, why do I feel that your name is a little familiar? Did we meet each other before? He really felt that he had heard the name somewhere before. You must have remembered it wrongly. It has been a month since I reached here from Gerosis. After saying that, Lin Li thought, you would not have met me before I reached Gerosis. I was still at a place called Endless World then. Gerosis? What was supposed to be a casual reply changed the expression on Azalez's face. You were saying that you're from Gerosis? You're right, I'm from Gerosis. Why, Mr. Azalez? Have you met me in Gerosis? Seeing Azalez change in expression, Lin Li grew doubtful. What might the matter be for it to create such a concern for the legendary warrior, Azalez? That, Felix, Azalez hesitated for a while, before he continued his question with uncertainty. I'm afraid you are going to face some trouble. What trouble? When you reached Alana a month ago, did you injure a young man named Matthias? Azalez asked with a serious and grave expression. Yeah, there was such an incident. You're in great trouble, Azalez sighed. Shaking his head, he asked, do you know who is Matthias' father? No, I don't. His father is Wilhelm. Wilhelm? Lin Li felt that this name was rather familiar, but he could not remember where he heard it before. Duskov. The leader of the Marathon family, Wilhelm. What marathon? Lin Li was a little confused at the beginning, but his speech stopped halfway as he nearly bit his tongue. You meant Marathon Workshop? That's right. Lin Li stared at Azalez in a daze, and only after a while did he mutter, what a big shot. That is really a big shot. In the whole Felon Kingdom, there was one power that could be comparable to man's family in terms of wealth, the Marathon family. The kingdom's legendary arms dealer controlled 70% of the forging business. As long as it was related to forging, anything would carry the logo of Marathon Smithy. The two influential families, the Marathon and the Mans family, controlled almost the entire kingdom's wealth. The strategies of these two, however, were completely different. The Mans family's Gilded Rose had always been all over the Felon Kingdom. Their trademark could be found even in the most Ulu village. According to Isra, he was absolutely going to expand the Gilded Rose business into heaven after he died. On the other hand, the Marathon family was a renowned merchant. Their best equipment would always be provided for the kingdom's army. For example, the carbines and armors of the Sky Knights were all manufactured in Marathon Smithy. To exaggerate a little, without Marathon, wars would still break out in today's Felon Kingdom, and all mages would be required to put on armor. Compared to Man's family that had been around since a long time, Marathon family was just established 600 years ago, and only attained its fame in the recent 300 years. Back then, Marathon Smithy was only a small blacksmith shop. Throughout the 100 years, their exquisite forging skills allowed the tiny blacksmith business to inch its way up. They not only gained a monopoly in today's Felon Kingdom, but also reached out into different other aspects. In the last 600 years, the Marathon family expanded to every corner of Felon Kingdom with its wealth. Members of the Marathon family could be found everywhere, regardless of whether in the state or the military. After some time, such a network had turned the Marathon family into a terrifying and formidable giant. In terms of wealth and power, today's Marathon family had reached the peak of glory. Even the Mans family that had a similar level of wealth would be incomparable to them because of the Marathon's strong backer, the whole military of the Felon Kingdom. The leader of the clan in this generation was Sir Wilhelm, who won the king's deep trust. Being in charge of the Felon military for over 30 years, he had been promoted to become the noble Duke of Felon Kingdom. For his status and ability as a legendary warrior, everyone who met him had no choice but to address him politely as Sir Wilhelm, and that was the Marathon family's glory today. That Matthias you had injured is the second son of Wilhelm, Azalez said as he glanced at Lin Li worriedly. I'm surprised. Lin Li touched his nose and laughed awkwardly. Honestly, he did not expect Matthias to have such a powerful background. Even though he was a little stupid to be the son of the kingdom's arms provider. Azalez remained quiet despite a doubtful expression on his face. There was one thing he could not figure out. How would he not know that Wilhelm was the type of person who would seek revenge for the slightest grievance? Matthias was the only magic genius in the few hundred years the clan existed, and was sent to Sunrise City Guild of Magic at a very young age. Matthias did not let Wilhelm down either, becoming a young level 12 magic shooter. Even the aunts of Alana would know the love Wilhelm had for his little son. Before the trial started, Wilhelm already convinced all his connections, including the royal mage, Aegis, to help Matthias excel in it. This matter was no secret among the nobles of Felon Kingdom. Even the leader of the Sky Knights, Azalez, who rarely socialized, heard of it too. Yet no one expected Matthias to suffer fracture to his 4 limbs at the beginning of the trial. Such incident was undoubtedly a tight slap to Wilhelm. Since Wilhelm was a very petty and vengeful man, how would he forgive the young mage before him? Azalez could not understand why this fella could still be alive, and also have the leisure to explore the black market so freely. But Lin Li had long understood the reason. It seems that the 2 men from the Guild of Magic were really receiving a lot of pressure. Lin Li, however, did not say anything. He just placed the matter in his mind silently. Do you need my help? It's all right. Lin Li shook his head, rejecting Azalez's offer. As the leader of the Sky Knights, if Azalez were to step in, even Wilhelm would have to compromise. Although that would not cover up the matter, he would be able to at least alleviate it. Of course, the prerequisite would compromise Lin Li. And that was why Lin Li refused. It was not that Lin Li would never yield to anyone. But, if he were to do so to someone, it would mean that he was prepared to smash a brick onto this person's head the next second. On top of that, he did not want to owe such a huge favor. After putting the matter aside, the 2 continued to chat until noon. Then, Lin Li left Azalez's house and traveled back to the Guild of Magic on foot. Before stepping into the guild hall, Lin Li entered the equipment shop at the corner of the street. Although he had gotten a hold of 10 sheets of salamandered skin, they had not undergone the tanning process, and were still raw. Hence, the skin was as hard as metal boards, and definitely could not be worn on the body, unless only as handheld shields. Good afternoon, Mage Felix. Good afternoon, Boss Buck. After Lin Li greeted the shop owner, he looked at the new products for a moment. Then, he asked, casually, how's your business? It's lucky today. I just sold 2 sets of armor, all thanks to you, Mage Felix, hee. If not for the eternal adamantine you gave me, the sales would not be as good. It's just a small matter, nothing much. The 2 people were familiar with each other due to the numerous business deals they had together. Furthermore, Lin Li had done Buck a favor by giving him the fragments of eternal adamantine that he'd found difficult to smelt. As the owner of an equipment shop, how would Buck be unaware of the value of the eternal adamantine? It was something no ordinary person could acquire, even if they were just fragments. The owner thanked Lin Li for it every time he saw him, causing Lin Li to feel a little embarrassed. Oh, yes, Boss Buck. Actually, I'm here to ask for a favor from you. Lin Li looked around the equipment shop before continuing, I have some skin of magical beasts. Can you help me dry it? I will be back after 2 days. Of course, Buck replied. The eternal adamantine given to him had helped him a lot, and he was a man with gratitude. If not for the eternal adamantine, how would the sales of the armors be that good? There are 10 sheets. How much should I pay you? Don't mention it, Buck rejected Lin Li's offer as he took the parcel from him. You had helped me a lot, and I don't even have the chance to thank you. How would drying the skin of magical beasts trouble me? Mage Felix, if you were going to talk about money, you would be looking down on me. Lin Li did not expect Buck to be so insistent. Since he did not want to accept the money, Lin Li could only thank him once more. I'll trouble you, then. That's nothing. Buck was not wrong to say that his business these few days was rather good. The moment Lin Li passed the parcel to him, customers entered the shop before Lin Li could turn around. They were 2 youthful adventurers, a bandit and a warrior. The warrior had a double-edged sword strapped to his back. Lin Li could tell that it was a fire element weapon. Among the adventurers in Alana, people who could use magical weapons were considered well off. As for the bandit, Lin Li was surprised to see his boots. If Lin Li did not see wrongly, that pair of boots must have undergone magical enchantment. It seemed that those two adventurers were close with each other. The reality verified Lin Li's prediction as well. When the two men set foot into the shop, the warrior asked, "Boss, I've heard that you sell armors made from the eternal adamantine?" Seeing the customers, Buck could only smile at Lin Li apologetically, and leave the parcel on the counter first. He said in a friendly tone, "Young man, you have a great taste. We not only sell armors made from the eternal adamantine, but also weapons produced by the Marathon Smithy. Do you want to take a look at this rifle? I don't need weapons for the time being. Could you show the armors to me? If they're as good as what they say outside, I might buy 2 sets of them." From the request of the adventurer, it was clear that he was here for the eternal adamantine. Lin Li was surprised that mere fragments of the eternal adamantine could give an equipment shop such a good business. When he reached the Guild of Magic, he saw Mason and Oren, but not Sean. Speaking of Sean, Lin Li sensed something odd. Ever since the day they had the meal gathering, Sean was nowhere to be found for the entire day. When Lin Li asked him where he went after he came back the next day, that fella only stuttered, I am sorry, Mr. Fellick. I'd promised someone to keep it a secret." Lin Li did not know whether he should cry or laugh at his reply. Since Sean already said it was a secret, he could not ask further. The following day, Sean went missing again. Lin Li even started to suspect that Sean got into a relationship with someone in Alana. Yes, and it would be dual cultivation. Or else, why would Sean's abilities increase so quickly? These few days, Sean really shocked Lin Li. The speed of his changes was too rapid. Almost every time when Sean came back, Lin Li would sense that his ability had made vigorous improvement. The change was too obvious. Not to mention Lin Li, who was naturally sensitive to strength, even a blind man would be able to detect the same. Lin Li, however, was unaware of the reason behind it. What did Sean encounter to allow him to have such a great improvement? Since Lin Li was the one who brought Sean to Alana, he knew Sean's ability better than anyone else. When he'd just reached Alana, Sean's ability was at most level 7. But, in the past few days, Lin Li could clearly sense that it was close to level 10 now. The advancement from level 7 to level 10 was a massive leap. At Gerosis, Lin Li had experienced such a leap before. He knew better than others how freakish such a leap was. Lin Li felt extremely tormented by his unspeakable curiosity as he witnessed the growth of Sean day by day. Yet that fella declined to reveal anything to him. Sometimes when Lin Li got a little to pressurizing him, his signature phrase, "I promised someone to keep it a secret," always allowed him to dodge Lin Li's questions. That made Lin Li gnash his teeth helplessly. When he got back to the house, Mason and Oren were dining. From the day the Supreme Council announced their decision, those two fellas worked extraordinarily hard. Especially Mason, he quit his habit of laziness to visit the Omniscient Tower every day to read religiously, and only reached home at 9 o'clock at night. It did not stop there. Mason even insisted that Oren practice magic with him at the spell testing hall after that. Mage was a very fair occupation. One would always be able to reap the results of the effort he put in. In just 2 days, Mason finally reached level 10 to become a magic shooter he had always been dreaming of. Of course, the price of being a magic shooter would be to be beaten up by Oren every single day and groan in pain before falling asleep every night. Oren had become a true level 12 magic shooter now, making his abilities comparable to Lin Li's. How would a level 10 magic shooter be of any hindrance to him? Fellick, you're back? Mason's face was still as swollen as before. When Lin Li was standing in the door, he was chewing on his bread loudly and glaring at Oren with eyes full of enmity. I've just arrived, Lin Li replied. Then, he asked, curiously, why did y'all not go to the Omniscient Tower today? Don't mention it. That old dude nagged at us from the moment we woke up, and only left just now. After telling Lin Li that, Mason glared at Oren fiercely, and said, pretty boy, let's fight after eating. I'm gonna teach you a lesson today, moron, Oren muttered without even looking up. Lin Li was beyond speechless. The two guys would get really uncomfortable if they didn't fight every day. Mason especially, it was as if he got himself addicted to being tortured by Oren. Even if he got bruises all over, he would get even motivated to challenge Oren the next day. Normal people could never win against him in such a fighting spirit. Oh, yeah. Felix, Mason spoke right after Lin Li took a seat and only chewed a few mouthfuls of bread. Just now, that old dude said he is going to come back in the afternoon to speak to you. Oh. Lin Li nodded, and continued eating his bread. Just right, he also wanted to discuss some issues with Macklin. When he was journeying back, he had decided that he needed to go visit the Fire Plume Ridge the moment he got the fire salamandered skin. He had to deal with those black lotuses there. Any further delay would become a problem for him. Furthermore, when he found out that the Marathon family was after him, he could not help but feel threatened. It would be a lie to say that he was not concerned about such a massive power. Although Lin Li was not scared of the Marathon family, it would be ideal for him to have more cards in hand. And the Black Lotus was undoubtedly the best card. Looking back at his battle with Cromwell when he was in Gerosis City, if not for his elixir of the sages, the consequences would be unpredictable if Lin Li were to be hit by that level 18 spell. Although the Fire Plume Ridge was not very far, it was not that near, either. He would need at least a few days to return. After all, Macklin was still their trial mentor. It would be rude to leave without informing him. Actually, apart from that, Lin Li had another plan too. But such a plan was still at the guessing stage. He could only verify it for himself when he reached the Fire Plume Ridge. Pretty boy, have you finished eating? After swallowing the last mouthful of bread, Mason looked at Oren challengingly. I'm definitely going to beat until your face turns black today. Jerk, just you wait. Subsequently, the two men headed out together. Macklin came knocking on the door right after Mason and Oren stepped out of the dorm. I finally found you, Macklin started to complain incessantly the moment he came in. I say, Felix, where were you the entire morning? I've been waiting for you for so long that my hair turned white. I just went to the black market to take a look and bought some things. But what's with you? What was it that made you so anxious? Lin Li said as he rolled his eyes. Don't tell me exaggeration is contagious. I'd only not seen this old man for a few days, how did he become more ludicrous than Mason in his words? It's a big matter. Macklin shouted harshly. All right. Shoot. Macklin told Lin Li the supposed big matter after a dry cough. Someone from the Pharmacists Guild visited this morning to pass you an invitation letter. He said it was to invite you to what meeting? What meeting? Lin Li asked in confusion. How would I know? I'm not a pharmacist. Yes, he wanted me to tell you that the invitation letter was personally sent by Grim Burnside. Macklin paused as he glanced at Lin Li suspiciously. You actually know Grim Burnside? Yeah, he taught me some magic before. Lin Li felt awkward at the mentioning of Old Grim. When he was at Gerosis, Old Grim put in all his effort to help improve his ability, but now that he was in Alana, he did not even pay him a visit afterwards. That made him seem like an ungrateful fella. Why don't I use this opportunity to visit Old Grim, and take a look at what meeting? Gosh, that's awkward. You are really a lucky fella, Macklin commented enviously. When he was at the age of Lin Li, he had never met many archmages, not to mention the legendary mages. As for mentorship, does being beaten up by an archmage count as mentorship? Where's the invitation letter? Give it to me. Oh, sure, Macklin suddenly remembered that invitation letter. He reached into his pocket for a while and took out a crumpled envelope. This, Lin Li looked at the envelope, then at Macklin in a daze. This, really was the invitation letter sent out by the Pharmacists Guild? And not a tissue that the old man carelessly mistook the letter for? Don't ask me, I don't know why, either. It was like this when I received it, Macklin defended himself innocently. Is that so? Lin Li glanced at him curiously before speed-reading the contents of the envelope. There was nothing much written in the letter. Without the ordinary diplomatic language, the true content was really little. It just mentioned that the Pharmacists Guild discovered an unusual potion formula, and if Master Felix was interested, he could join the research at the guild 1 week later. What formula would be so powerful? Lin Li murmured curiously. He was not new to the Pharmacists Guild, and according to Andoin, even the guards of the guild had the knowledge of creating recovery potions. How would they be affected by the formula of any potion? Unless the formula was at the level of a guru, or divine smith. Lin Li was shocked by the sudden thought. After staring blankly for a couple of minutes, he forced himself to put the matter in the back of his mind. Oh, yes. Mr. Macklin, I would like to take a few days of leave. Leave? Yeah, I need around 4 to 5 days to attend to some private matter. What kind of private matter would require such a long period of time? Do you need my help? Macklin asked nervously. This fellow was the treasurer of Alana Guild of Magic. Without the protection from Aldwin and himself, what if anything were to happen to him? Furthermore, these few days were extremely crucial. Who would know if the Marathon family would do anything to him? It's not a big deal, just going to collect something. Don't worry, I'll be back in 4 or 5 days. Please stay safe, Macklin only cautioned him, and did not force Lin Li to tell him what he was going to do. Yes, I will, Lin Li said while nodding his head. The sun had just risen the next day when Sean was stopped by Lin Li. This fellow woke up early, planning to sneak out just like in the past few days. However, today he had just touched the door handle when he heard Lin Li's voice coming from the back. Morning, Sean. Morning, Mr. Felix. The greeting that came from behind almost made Sean die from shock. He turned around with a frightened look, and saw Lin Li stick his head out from the blanket, looking at him with a sleazy smile. How could Sean have known that Lin Li had woken up early and even placed a warlock's eye in the room for surveillance, just to stop him? He would not have been able to leave even if he used invisibility, much less moving around stealthily. Just by looking at Sean's panic-stricken face, Lin Li knew that this fella tried to sneak out again. If it was a few days ago, Lin Li would turn a blind eye to it. After all, Sean's strength had obviously risen in the last few days. Sometimes, Lin Li suspected if Sean would be able to take over him in levels at this rate. Naturally, nobody would complain about having too much of such a good thing. Even if Sean remained silent, Lin Li would still continue to support him. In the end, he had a type of intrinsic trust in Sean. However, not today. Today he had something else more important to do. Lin Li coughed and casually asked, going out to get food? Sean looked guilty after being questioned, and he could only ambiguously reply, Mr. Felix, what do you want to eat? I'll help you buy it. No need, we'll go eat in a bit. Lin Li wore the robe of the void as he spoke. After he had folded the blanket, he turned over to remind Sean as if he thought of something. Oh, yes, don't wander around today. Go with me to Fire Plume Ridge later. Fire Plume Ridge? Sean was in a daze for a while, before deciding that Lin Li was not pulling his leg. Instantly, Sean started stuttering. Really? It really is Fire Plume Ridge? What else did you think it was? Lin Li wore the robe of the void and started to urge the dazed Sean without explaining further. Why are you still in a daze? Hurry, pack up. Our trip this time will be for a few days. Oh. There was nothing much for Sean to pack. There was only one double-edged sword and a fire-salamandered leather armor. These 2 pieces of equipment cost about 20,000 gold coins. Usually, Sean could not bear to use them and left them in his room. He even cleaned it properly 3 times a day. It made Lin Li question if those items that he bought were actually equipment. There was no need to be afraid that it would rust by taking such good care of it every day. However, today was still all right. For the first time, Sean wore the fire-salamandered leather armor, and strapped the abyss fiendish iron greatsword to his back, looking magnificent and mighty. It was as if he had the aura of a high-level warrior. When they left the Guild of Magic, the streets were still somewhat empty. There were only a few vendors that sold breakfast, pushing their carts around, serving steaming hot breakfast to customers. Lin Li was a person that disliked inconvenience. He gobbled down his food after he had bought breakfast for Sean and himself. It made a few of the customers look at him in disdain. They probably had not seen such an uncouth mage before. Sean was nibbling on his food, he seemed to be somewhat absent-minded. There were a few times he struggled to speak, but every time the words came to him, he swallowed them down with hesitation. If there is anything you want to say, just hurry. Don't keep turning around, it's making me dizzy. Lin Li saw his expression, and knew that this kid wanted to say something. Mr. Fellick, I was thinking. Thinking about what? Just hurry, stop turning around. This trip is going to take a few days, you should notify the others. In any case, they taught you some martial arts. You, Sean was dumbfounded. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He stuttered you for a while, before he completed the sentence. How did you know? How could I not know? Lin Li rolled his eyes. He thought to himself, you're behaving like a thief every day, leaving in the morning and coming back at night with a secretive look. Your strength has improved tremendously, faster than anyone cultivating the yin-yang combo and dual cultivation method. Even a blind person could see it. If not because of a master guiding you, how could you improve to this state? Of course, Lin Li did not say it out loud. He just waved his hand impatiently. Just hurry up. I'll be at the store where I bought your equipment. Once you're done, come look for me over there. Oh. After chasing Sean away, Lin Li devoured his breakfast in a few bites, before walking over to the equipment store at the corner. What is going on? Lin Li realized something was wrong when he just entered the store. The store was in a mess. The weapons and armor were sprawled all over the floor like a hideous mess. It was as if there was a locust plague recently. Buck was picking up the items, and one of his hands was covering his left cheek. It seemed to be swollen. What happened, Boss Buck? No, nothing. Buck stood up with difficulty while covering his left cheek and squeezed out an awkward smile at Lin Li. I can only blame it on my luck, running into troublemakers early in the morning. Oh. Lin Li nodded, and did not question further. Such incidents were very common in Alana. Frankly speaking, equipment business was a firearms business. Which of those patronizing such stores was a law-abiding citizen? If you do not believe, you can ask the vendors outside selling breakfast and see if they would come here to buy weapons and armor. Such places had always been full of troubles. Today's situation could be considered minor. Blood splattering without a single word was as common as eating. Furthermore, such incidents were of no concern for Lin Li. Since Buck could open an equipment store and a smelting workshop at the same time, how could such a person have no background? The losses he suffered today could be recouped in a few days. There was no need for Lin Li to worry for him. Oh, yes, Boss Buck. Has my batch of magical beast leather been tanned? It has been tanned, Mage Fellick. Sit here for a while, I'll bring it over now. Buck took out bag from the storeroom. It contained 10 pieces of tanned fire salamandered leather. After Lin Li exchanged a few polite greetings, he asked for recommendations for a leatherworking shop. There was no special request, and Lin Li was too lazy to do it himself. He dealt with the 10 pieces of fire salamandered leather at the leatherworking store across the street. It was going to be a total of 2 pieces of leather armor, 2 pairs of leather boots and 2 leather pairs of leather gloves. After returning to Buck's store, Lin Li saw that Sean had not returned yet. He decided to borrow a room from Buck, and focused on dealing with these 2 sets of leather armor. This was the most crucial step. Although fire salamandered leather had high fire resistance, before it had been treated with inscriptions, it could hardly negate the temperatures of fire Plume Ridge. This was one of the reasons why Lin Li had to get his hands on the raw leather, or he would have to rely on the set that Sean was wearing, and it would be barely enough to just test the waters at fire Plume Ridge. After Lin Li closed the door, he took out a fire resistance potion first from the Ring of Endless Storm. When he was at Endless World, the various potions were what Lin Li drank the most. There was no other way. Resistance potions were too important for a hunter battling at the Well of the Sun. Without these items, he would have died at any given time from various types of magic. Yet, Lin Li hardly drank such things when he came to Amril. This was the difference between a hunter and a mage. Even though resistance potion could provide high magic resistance, it could severely diminish the sensitivity towards magical elements. For a mage, drinking potions and casting spells was like wearing dozens of condoms. However, the fire resistance potion in his hand was not meant for drinking. Placing the fire resistance potion aside, Lin Li continued to retrieve items from the Ring of Endless Storm. He took out a bottle of star sand, a glass beaker, and a crystal pen. Lin Li only picked up the star sand after all the materials were all set, and he carefully poured it into beaker. This thing was not like the navy sand, which could be found in all magical material stores. The bottle in Lin Li's hand was extorted from the Gilded Rose store while relying on Isra's connections. A thin layer of star sand sat at the bottom of the cup, looking like a plane of stars. It seemed like it really was brilliant and as dazzling as a sky full of stars. After Lin Li admired it for a moment, he uncapped the bottle of fire resistance potion, and gently poured some into the beaker. After doing all those, Lin Li held the beaker with his hand, reciting a short spell at the same time. Flaming hands lit up, and he carefully controlled his mana as he had to maintain the temperature of flaming hands within a small range. This was an essential process in concocting star sand ink. The magical elements contained within the star sand had to be heated up before they could be released. The star sand and fire resistance potion in the beaker started blending together as Lin Li released his mana bit by bit, permeating the room with a white mist. Lin Li carefully observed the changes in these two materials as he swirled the beaker gently, allowing the two to blend more uniformly. Poof, poof, poof. With the heat from the flaming hands, the fire resistance potion started to bubble. The white mist that curled upwards had a trace of a pungent smell. This was the unique smell of the star sand. When this smell was produced, it was the sign that this bottle of star ink had been successfully concocted. Lin Li dispersed the flames on his hands, and placed the star ink that had been concocted on the table. Then, he laid out the two sets of leather armor, and started to construct the outlines of two magewefts in his head. These two magewefts had been designed by Lin Li for almost more than a month. When he picked up the crystal pen, he only had to recall for a bit, and he could set the outline of these two magewefts. The crystal was coated with a slightly thick red liquid after being dipped in the star ink lightly. What Lin Li laid on the leather armor was a fire resistance force field. Because the star ink was blended with the fire resistance potion, the fire resistance force field produced from this ink would be stronger than those magewefts that were produced with normal ink. With the addition of the innate fire resistance from the fire salamandered leather, it should not be a problem going to Fire Plume Ridge. Of course, wearing it did not mean that they could jump straight into magma. Lin Li had already thought about this mageweft for a long while. It was like he drew it without stopping this time. With just a few strokes of the pen, he had already drew the rough sketch of the outline. After mounting a level 5 magical crystal in the middle of the magical crystal, all that was left was to make it more well-developed. Just when Lin Li was focusing on drawing the mageweft, there was a sudden burst of human voices from outside of the door. Initially, Lin Li thought that Sean had came back. After hearing again, it was a barrage of scolding. "Buck, come out now. CK your mom, you actually dare to sell a broken armor like this?" Before Lin Li could understand what was happening, a muffled voice had already started scolding. When this scolding voice was heard, Lin Li felt that it was somewhat familiar, as though he heard it somewhere. Even more so, it was very recent. It was either today or yesterday. "I only wore it once, and someone pierced it with a sword. CK your mom. If it hadn't been for my luck, I wouldn't have known how I died. I will definitely smash your useless store today." "No, you can't do this." As there was a scream from Buck, there was BAM coming from outside of the door. The screeching of metal sounded as though the weapons rack had been knocked over by someone. This was followed by sounds of a struggle. He thought that Buck must have started fighting with the other party. Scram. Lin Li hesitated for a little. He borrowed Buck's room to draw the mage with. If he was to stand by idly and watch as Buck's store got trashed, it would be hardly justifiable. Forget it, I'll offer them some advice. Lin Li thought about it and stopped his work, deciding to advise them. After all, this was a dispute between a businessman and his customer. It would not reach the degree of someone dying. Who knew that just as Lin Li opened the door, he heard a windy sound coming over. At the moment when the windy sound came over, Lin Li instinctively lowered his head. Immediately, there was a beam of light flying past his head. Before Lin Li could stand up, there was crisp ping coming from behind. Fuck, Lin Li's heart skipped a few beats when the crisp sound was heard. He did not need to turn around to know that something major happened. That sound was obviously made by shattering glass, and in this room there was only a beaker of star ink. What else was there that was made of glass? Fuck, Lin Li really felt like killing somebody. He'd never imagined himself to be so unlucky. If you want to smash the store, then just smash it. What right do you have to smash my star ink? That was star ink, something that could not be bought from anywhere. Lin Li glanced towards the table. The beaker has indeed been smashed. The less than half of the beaker's star ink was flowing down the table. It was all red, just as though fresh blood had been spilled. There was a dagger stuck near the broken beaker. It had to be this thing that flew in from the door just now and broke the star ink that was painstakingly concocted. When Lin Li came out from the room, his face had already turned livid from rage. He did not even greet Buck, and just stood at the door's entrance, watching who had the nerve to do that. The troublemaker was indeed someone familiar. It was the warrior that came to buy the armor. He was fierce-looking, and he even carried a decent fire attribute magical weapon. The thief that followed him the other day was here today as well. He was now smashing things while threatening Buck for reimbursement along with that warrior. F***CK. I haven't got you to pay me back for the star ink, and you actually asked somebody to else pay. May I know who threw this dagger? Lin Li's voice was terrifyingly calm. If Mason here, he more or less would know the problem. The more polite this fellow was, the more likely would there be trouble. If he spoke to you politely, then you'd better be worried. You could very likely have a spell pounding at your face in the next second. Unfortunately, that warrior was not Mason. He had no idea whose belongings the dagger that was thrown had crushed. So, he lifted his head audaciously. I threw it, why? Nothing, just asking. Lin Li took the dagger and walked over, handing it to the warrior very politely. The warrior rudely took back the dagger and stared at Lin Li recklessly. If there's nothing, then shove it. Don't stand in the way. If you were to get crushed by something, don't blame me. I'll watch and leave. Lin Li smiled, and a surge of magical wave started to spread all over the place. What's there to see? Ah. Before the warrior could complete his sentence, he gave out a loud shriek. Lin Li did not give him any chances. He immediately lifted his hand and fired an arcane missile that smashed right into the warrior's face. Even a magical beast would not be able to withstand it while getting smashed in the face by an arcane missile while being defenseless, much less a human. Under the immense force of impact, the warrior seemingly flew out instantaneously. Lin Li was considered merciful. He did not release all of his mana when firing that arcane missile. Otherwise, the warrior would have been blown up even with that muscular body. If not, how could he have the strength to lie there panting and moaning like now? You, what are you doing? Even though he was not blown up, it did not mean that the warrior was not afraid. Initially, when he saw the black robe Lin Li was wearing, he had not reacted to it. He thought that it was just normal clothes. Once the arcane missile flew into his face, the warrior suddenly recalled what was the most likely profession of people that wore this black robe. He even recalled the rumors that he'd heard. Accordingly, among the mages, the color of the robes determined their levels. The darker the color, the higher level. A mage that wore a black robe like this one was a person of prominent position even within Alana's guild of magic. As for how prominent it was not something an adventurer at his level would know. The warrior lay on the floor, getting more terrified as he thought about it. If this was really the case, then the opponent could conveniently kill him. There was no need to worry about the mercenary corps' revenge. This was because there was no mercenary corps within Alana City that would seek vengeance against the Guild of Magic. Even though Lin Li was merciful, the arcane missile was still a level 2 spell. When it smashed into the face at such a close distance, it was not lighter than being struck by a pole. When the warrior struggled to stand up, more than half of his face had already swelled up. Some of his teeth had dropped out, and the blood that was mixed with saliva flowed out of his mouth that could not be closed. He looked to be in a very sorry state. When this sudden unforeseen event befell the eyes of people, be it Boss Buck or the thief that was wearing a pair of shoes with magical enchantment, they stood there, dumbfounded. Nobody thought that this unforeseen event would be so abrupt. In an instant, the seemingly powerful warrior adventurer had been whipped like a dog, lying on the floor. Faye. Mage Velik. Buck looked at Lin Li as though he had just met Lin Li today. In fact, he did indeed have this feeling. He made a few deals with this young mage. He always felt that the other party was a gentle young man. No matter what Lin Li did, he seemed like he always took his own and would never lose his temper. Yet, up to that point, Buck discovered that he had been wrong, and he was severely wrong at that. This young mage not only would lose his temper, but when he did lose his temper, it was scarier than for most people. Frankly speaking, the warrior's luck was not that bad. If it had been in the past, there was no knowing how Lin Li would have fixed him up. However, Lin Li was too busy today. After giving him a small lesson, Lin Li did not plan to give him any more trouble. There were too many incidents today. The star ink had been spilled, and Lin Li had to concoct a new bottle again. The mage weapon on those 2 pieces of leather armor had to be dealt with quickly. When Sean returned, they had to depart for Fire Plume Ridge. This journey was going to be long, and they had to return by time stated on the invitation letter. There was not much time that could be wasted on such things. You guys can leave now. Yes, we will leave now. The unlucky warrior suffered great losses, yet he did not dare to retaliate. Naturally, he was not an idiot, as he could stay an adventurer until this day. Looking at this mage in front of him, it was obvious the mage was not someone he could provoke. Other than admitting that he was unlucky, he dared not have a single thought about taking revenge when facing such a person. When Lin Li finished his sentence, the unlucky warrior crawled towards the door as though he had been received an amnesty. Just as he reached the door, Lin Li suddenly went back on his words. Hold on. Mr. Mage, you, what orders do you have? The unlucky warrior's face was slightly pale. His life was in somebody else's hand, he could not retaliate even if he wanted to. Before leaving, could you tell who actually instigated you to come here and create trouble? No. Nobody instigated us. The unlucky warrior summoned up his courage with difficulty and completed his sentence. He was sweating profusely. There was an immense pressure when standing in front of this unpredictable young mage. Try saying that again. Lin Li glanced and started smiling again. When the warrior saw that smile, it immediately sent shivers down his spine. He clearly remembered that this young mage smiled in this manner as well when he struck out just now. After hesitating, he still did not confess. Of course, he did not dare to as well. He even confirmed that if he were spout out another word, another arcane missile would immediately land on his face. He dared not take such a risk. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.